The millionaire made an unusual bet. He would marry the first woman who walked into the restaurant, and then she appeared. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? And if you love emotional love stories, filled with overcoming and unexpected twists, subscribe to the channel. That helps me keep bringing content that touches the heart and helps the channel grow more and more. The hall was perfectly lit. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like stars trapped in time, while the marble floor reflected the steps of men in suits and women in haute couture dresses. Everything at the Whitmore Grand that night overflowed with luxury, opulence, and boredom. In the private corner of an exclusive restaurant inside the hotel, a group of businessmen gathered. Around a long table, champagne glasses in hand, and laughter dulled by the repetition of old stories and elegant lies. At the center of them, Graham Whitmore seemed detached. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, his tie snug at the neck, but his gaze vague, distant, grayish blue like a cloudy sky, as if he had seen everything and expected nothing more. "You're really turning into a statue, Graham," mocked one of the partners, laughing loudly. "Seriously, at least pretend you're alive." Graham sighed deeply and took a sip of the expensive wine in front of him. "It's always the same. The people, the toasts, the intentions. I even know the name of who's going to fake a smile at me today." "Then shake it up, man," insisted another. "Make something up, I don't know, make a bet." Graham leaned back in his chair, stared at the entrance to the hall, and, in an almost cynical impulse, muttered, "All right, I'll marry the first woman who walks through that door." The table burst into laughter, a collective laugh blind to consequence. "You're crazy," said one. "Are you serious?" shouted another. But he didn't answer. He just crossed his arms and stared at the entrance, as if daring fate to challenge him. And then she appeared. The door opened slowly. A light breeze came in with her. She wore the simple uniform of a maid, dark pants, a white button-down shirt, and a vest with the hotel's logo, but that didn't matter. The entire hall seemed to stop. The waiters froze mid-step. The orchestra hesitated for a second. It was Elena Morales, light brown skin, illuminated by the warm chandelier. Light. Her dark, long, perfectly straight hair fell freely down her back like a silk waterfall. Her eyes, a deep golden brown, seemed to see everything at once. And even though she was only there to return a shawl forgotten by some rich lady, her presence commanded the room as if she were royalty. She didn't smile, nor did she lower her gaze. She walked with firm posture to one of the tables in the back, unaware that she had become the center of Graham Whitmore's universe. "Who is she?" asked one of the men beside him, almost whispering. Graham didn't know either, but he felt something, not a shiver, not an impact. It was an inner silence, as if everything he knew had lost meaning, and all that remained was that figure crossing the room. "She isn't a guest," murmured another, noticing the uniform. "She's an employee," warned a third, shocked. The laughter returned, but quieter, more nervous, and one of the partners stood up, still joking. "Well then, congratulations, Graham. There's your fiancée." Elena heard. She stopped. Their eyes met, his surprised, stunned, hers offended but proud. She realized she'd been used as a joke, but she didn't retreat. She didn't apologize. With sharp calmness, she said, "Sorry to interrupt the party. I just came to return what was forgotten." She handed the shawl to its owner and turned to leave. Graham, still seated, felt his stomach tighten. For the first time in years, he was ashamed of where he was, of who he was. And as he saw her walk away, he felt he had lost something without ever knowing it, but fate wasn't finished with them. Graham remained seated, but his eyes followed Eleanor's every step. The sound of glasses, The background music, even the comments around him seemed to fade as she crossed the hall with the folded shawl in her arms. She approached the lady who owned the item and handed it over politely. "Sorry to bother you," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I found this in the elevator and thought I should return it personally." The woman barely responded. She just took the shawl as if fulfilling a formality. Elena thanked her with a slight nod and turned to leave. But that's when one of the partners, clearly drunk on his own arrogance, decided to play along with Graham's bet. "Hey, the bet was made, Whitmore. What are you waiting for? Gonna let that woman go?" Laughter. Once again, the elite laughed as if everything was a private spectacle. Elena stopped, feeling the weight of the silence forming around her. She turned slowly, her face flushed with indignation. Her eyes, deep and striking, landed directly on Graham. "Was that about me?" she asked, her voice low but as sharp as a blade. Graham didn't respond immediately. He hadn't expected her to hear, hadn't expected to feel something. But now, in front of this real woman, flesh, bone, and dignity, words seemed useless. "It was just a stupid joke," he finally said, his voice hoarse, almost regretful. Elena took a deep breath. Her dark hair swayed slightly as she tilted her head, as if deciding not to stoop to their level. "Funny, it didn't feel like a joke when everyone laughed at me." There was something in her posture, firm, upright, unapologetically present, that unsettled Graham more than any tough negotiation, more than any media scandal. "I didn't know who you were," he said. She took a step forward, the distance between them now small enough that he could smell her soft perfume, something between jasmine and determination. "And now you do. And still, you're sitting." The impact of those words hit directly. It felt like a punch to the ego, but also to the heart, because she was right. He who always had control suddenly felt small in the face of her greatness. Elena turned to leave, and this time no one dared to laugh. The hall, once full of vanity and superiority, was silent. Graham stood up, but it was too late. She was already gone, and with her she took the peace he didn't even know he had until then. He stood there, staring at the door through which she had disappeared, as if something had been torn away. Something he never imagined he'd feel for. Someone who dared him to be better, be better. On the outside, it was just a ridiculous bet. On the inside, something had changed, and he knew it. The night went on for the others. But for Graham Whitmore, the ball was over. Graham stood there, motionless, staring at the door through which Elena had disappeared. There was something unsettling in the air, as if he had lost something precious without even knowing its name. The party continued around him, but everything felt blurry. Glasses clinked, fake smiles returned to faces, but his gaze remained fixed on the emptiness. And then she came back. Elena re-entered the hall, still in her impeccable uniform, now carrying a tray with 2 glasses someone had left in the lounge. Her expression was steady, but there was no sweetness left. There was dignity. There was pride, and that made her even more unbelievably beautiful. Graham took a step forward, as if driven by something even he didn't understand. The shame from the bet still burned on his skin, but there was something bigger at play, something that made his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in years. When Elena passed by him, he spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "May I have this dance?" She stopped, looked at him, assessing. Her brown eyes shone with a mix of surprise and distrust. "You're mistaking me for someone from your party," she said firmly. "No," he replied in a calmer, more sincere tone. "I just want to dance with you." Elena hesitated. She knew she shouldn't. She knew that didn't belong to her world, that dancing with a man like him in a place like that was crossing an invisible line. But there was something in the way he looked at her, as if he was seeing for the first time something real. "Just one dance," she said at last. He offered his hand, and she accepted. The orchestra played a soft melody. The hall lights were dimmer now, and the glow of the chandeliers made the room look like something out of an old movie. As the two began to move slowly in the center of the floor, the eyes around them turned to watch, but they didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. His hand was warm on her back, hers rested lightly on his shoulder. Their bodies moved with an unlikely harmony. It wasn't a rehearsed dance, it was a silent surrender. "Do you always dance with strangers?" she asked without looking directly at him. "Actually, I don't usually dance with anyone," he replied with a slight smile. "So why with me?" He took a few seconds before answering. "Because when you walked in, everything changed." Elena felt a tightness in her chest. He spoke with unexpected honesty. It didn't feel like a game. And in that moment, she stopped thinking about the uniform she wore, the judgment of others, or what would come next. For a moment, it was just her and him. The music ended. They slowly stepped apart, as if the magic broke with the final note. Elena looked at him one last time and turned to leave, this time with resolve. But before she reached the exit, he called out, "Wait! What's your name?" She stopped without turning. "Elena," and then she was gone, as if that moment had been a breath in time. Graham stood still in the center of the hall, surrounded by people who meant nothing. The music started again. Couples returned to the floor. Laughter echoed once more. But inside him there was a void, the kind of silence that only appears when something real passes through you. And you don't know if you'll get another chance. That same night, he asked the hotel manager for the full list of staff on shift. He needed to know more. He needed to find her. He needed to understand her. But he didn't know that discovering who Elena Morales was would change his life forever. Graham didn't sleep that night. Even lying in his quiet penthouse, with the city lights blinking beyond the balcony, his thoughts were somewhere else. Or rather, with someone else. The way she had looked at him, the weight of her absence when she walked away. Elena, the woman, who entered the hall with no intention at all and undid everything he thought he understood about control. The next morning he arrived early at the hotel lobby, something he rarely did. There were no meetings scheduled, no urgent appointments, just a restlessness that led him to wander through the corridors, pretending to admire the art on the walls, when in fact he was hoping to bump into her. But he didn't see her. 3 days went by like that, waiting, frustration, silence, until, on the afternoon of the 4th day, while walking down one of the staff-only corridors, he saw her. Elena was coming from the opposite direction, holding a clipboard and wearing the same sober uniform as always. Hair down, swaying slightly as she walked quickly. He stopped, his heart raced. "Elena!" She saw him and immediately looked away. She tried to keep walking as if she hadn't heard, but he stepped in front of her, not invading her space, but making it clear he wouldn't let her pass without speaking. "Just a minute, please," she sighed, her striking eyes fixed on him, filled with resolve. "You're not supposed to be here. Maybe this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Elena gripped the clipboard tighter, trying to maintain composure. "If this is about the dance, it's over. You don't have to explain yourself." "But I want to." She hesitated. He took the chance. That night, it wasn't just a bet. It was something I can't explain. She stared at him for a few seconds. There was pain there, but also curiosity, as if part of her wanted to believe. He seemed different, less arrogant, more human. "I'm just a maid. You are..." "You? Why are you doing this?" Because for the first time in a long while, someone saw me, and I saw you too. The corridor went quiet, and when Elena walked away, she didn't say anything else, but she wasn't angry anymore, just confused, stirred. In the days that followed, they began to cross paths more often. Small nods turned into short conversations, then longer ones, always behind the scenes of the hotel, away from the elite's eyes. Sometimes it was in the service hallway, other times in the back garden, when she stepped out to breathe after hours of work. In those conversations, Graham wasn't the heir. He was just a man trying to understand what made him smile again. Elena talked about the grandmother who raised her, about the dreams she postponed to work. Graham listened and didn't interrupt, nor did he offer solutions like all the rich men she had met. He just was there. "Do you know how many people actually listen to me without trying to fix my life?" she asked one night, sitting beside him on a wooden bench under the starry sky. "Maybe none," he replied. "But I don't want to fix you. I want to understand." She looked away, moved. That broke her down more than any expensive gift could. Every exchange between them was a new dance, now without music, without rules. Just two souls from opposite worlds, finding a place where pain could be shared without shame. But what neither of them knew was that the world around them was about to find out about this growing connection. And not everyone would accept what was being born there. That week, Graham and Elena kept running into each other behind the scenes of the hotel. They talked more. Sometimes they laughed. They shared silences that said a lot. But despite the growing bond, something was bothering Graham, and an idea had been forming in his mind since the moment she rejected him back in the ballroom. It all started with an emergency board meeting. The resort's public image needed something new, something human, something that would make him seem more than just the aloof heir who inherited everything and lost a tragic engagement. "You need a narrative, Graham, a story people want to follow," said the image consultant. "People love a redemption arc, a new love, something real, or that feels real." The idea bothered him until he thought of her, Elena. Later, when he found her folding towels in the laundry room, his heart sped up. Her face was slightly sweaty, hair tucked behind her ears, sleeves rolled up. Even so, she looked stunning, strong, authentic. "I need to talk to you," he said, walking in without ceremony. She turned, suspicious. "You're not supposed to be here." "I know, but this can't wait." She crossed her arms. "Then, talk?" Graham took a deep breath. "I want to make you an offer. Before you get the wrong idea, just hear me out." She raised an eyebrow. Every time someone says that, it's because they're about to say something foolish. He forced a tense smile. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend, just for 3 months." Elena looked at him like he had completely lost his mind. "Are you joking?" "No, I'm serious." He stepped closer. "There's a season of events coming up. Dinners, launches, social commitments. They're pressuring me to seem more approachable. And after that night, you became a topic." She crossed her arms tighter. "So your solution is to turn me into a marketing piece?" "It's not that, it's just—" He hesitated. "If you say yes, I can help cover your grandmother's medical costs. I know she needs care." Silence. Elena froze. "You looked into my life." "No, you mentioned it once in the back garden. I just remembered." She looked down, fighting fury and desperation. Pride screamed to say no, but the image of her grandmother coughing in the middle of the night, with medicine getting more expensive, began to burn inside. 3 months? She asked, still not looking at him. "Until the end of the season," he answered sincerely. "After that, you go back to your life. I go back to mine. I just need you. Until then." Elena slowly raised her face. Her brown eyes were shining, not from emotion but from restrained anger. "You might have the money, Graham, but you don't have the right to buy my silence or my body. I would never do that." She stepped forward, close enough that he could feel her breath. "If I say yes, there will be 3 rules. First, you don't control me. Second, don't touch me unless I allow it. Third, if you humiliate me in front of your friends, it ends right there." Graham nodded. "Deal." She extended her hand. He shook it firmly. But as Elena turned to go back to work, her expression hardened. Graham stood there, knowing he had just stepped into something far bigger than he expected. Because in that moment, it wasn't just a strategy. It was the only chance he had to keep her close. But it was also the beginning of something that would soon spin completely out of his control. Agreements are easy to make on paper. What's hard is sticking to them when the heart starts to disobey. Within the first few days of the arrangement, Elena was called to accompany Graham to a series of social events: charity dinners, private cocktail parties, the launch of multi-million-dollar ventures. The PR team provided elegant dresses, expensive shoes, behavior instructions. But Elena, even in high heels and red lipstick, was still herself. Steady gaze, upright posture, free spirit. On the first night, everyone expected her to stumble through silverware etiquette and the elite silent codes. But she surprised them. She didn't bow, didn't pretend. She just smiled respectfully and spoke only to those she wanted to. While others whispered behind her back, Graham simply watched in silence, increasingly intrigued. "You're not intimidated by anyone," he said at the end of the dinner, inside the car on the way home. She looked out the window, tired but calm. "I didn't come here to please anyone. I came for a reason. And when all this is over, I'll still be who I am." He looked away, moved by that simple truth. The following days were similar, but what had once been acting started to blur into something more. One night, during a formal dinner on the terrace of a historic building in Savannah, Graham held her hand in front of the guests while they toasted. The touch was light but firm. Elena, instead of pulling away, kept her fingers intertwined with his for long seconds. She looked at him calmly without smiling, but her eyes said everything. It was as if the world had gone quiet around them. At another event, in a garden lit by hanging lights, Eleanor stepped away for a few minutes to get some air. Graham followed. She stood alone by the fountain, watching the water flow. "Do you avoid people?" he asked. "Only the ones who don't. You see me," she replied without turning. He approached, stopping beside her. The silence between them was heavy with tension but not uncomfortable. There was a quiet understanding, ancient and unexplainable. "You have this habit of saying the right thing even when you don't mean to," he said, smiling softly. "And you have this habit of thinking everything can be solved with charm," she shot back, turning her face toward him. That's when their eyes met. Their breathing slowed. Time seemed suspended. He stepped closer. His hand gently touched hers. She didn't pull away. And for a moment, everything in the universe screamed for a kiss. But Graham stepped back, just one step, and looked away. "If I kiss you now, it won't be a lie anymore," he murmured. Elena lowered her eyes, touched and confused. She was ready for it to be a lie, but part of her desperately wanted it to be true. The love growing between them was hidden in the small gestures, in the lingering glances, in the way she poured extra coffee for him on mornings when he hadn't slept well, in the way he ran his hand lightly across her back when he thought no one was looking, and especially in how neither of them said out loud what their hearts were already screaming inside. But the world around doesn't forgive silence for long, and soon someone would start to suspect that this was no longer just an arrangement. The tension between them grew like fire beneath ashes, silent, warm, inevitable, And once again, fate would push them past the barriers they were trying so hard to maintain. Graham and Elena had traveled together to represent the Whitmore Group at a business convention in Asheville, a city in the mountains of North Carolina. It was supposed to be a formal event, followed by immediate returns, as always. But the storm came out of nowhere. Strong winds, lightning splitting the sky, and within minutes all flights were cancelled. No return in sight. The convention hotel became overcrowded with no available rooms. One of Graham's assistants made a last-minute decision to rent a mountain cabin, remote and discreet, with a fireplace, an open kitchen, and only one bedroom. When they arrived, Eleanor looked at the place with suspicion. There was something almost too romantic about that wooden cabin surrounded by trees soaked in rain. "Are you sure it's appropriate for us to stay here?" she asked as she got out of the car. "It's this or sleeping in the airport lobby," he replied, drying his hair with his coat sleeve. "Don't worry, you can have the bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch." She didn't answer. She just walked in, still trying to ignore the thick, warm atmosphere that seemed to fill the space between them. Inside, they lit the fireplace, changed clothes, and spent time on opposite sides of the room. Elena wore a loose sweater and comfortable pants, her damp hair falling softly over her shoulders. Even in that simple state, or maybe because of it, Graham found her more beautiful than ever. Later, he came over with 2 mugs of hot tea. They sat in front of the fireplace, one on each side, the crackling of the wood filling the space between unspoken words. "It's strange being here," Elena murmured. "No photographers, no rehearsed smiles." "It is, but it's also nice." She looked at him. He was different, calmer, less guarded. "You seem less arrogant without a suit," she said, half joking. "You seem more dangerous with wet hair," he replied, with a soft, genuine smile. They both laughed. For the first time, a light, honest laugh. The silence returned, but it was a comfortable silence now, until Graham broke it, his voice low, almost a confession. "You look at me like I'm a good person." Eleanor didn't look away. She took a deep breath and said, with the firmness that always accompanied her, "Maybe you just need to remember who you are." He looked at her, as if those words had touched something forgotten inside him, and in that moment, everything changed. Graham slowly moved closer. Eleanor didn't move away. The world outside disappeared with the rain. Time inside that cabin stood still. When his lips touched hers, it was a slow, almost reverent gesture. There was no rush, no performance. It was a quiet kiss, filled with everything they had been avoiding for weeks. Elena closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel. For the first time, it wasn't part of an agreement. It was real. His hands rested on her waist, as if afraid to break her. She touched his face gently, realizing how vulnerable he was, without money, without influence, just a man lost within himself. It was a night without a script, without promises, but full of truth. Hours later, lying side by side on the floor, covered with blankets, still near the fireplace, neither dared to say a word. The silence said it all. But both knew that at dawn, the real world would be waiting, and from then on, nothing would ever be the same. The sun had barely risen when the helicopter landed back in Charleston. The mountain cabin already felt like a distant dream, or worse, something they could no longer touch. During the flight back, Elena and Graham hardly spoke, not out of regret, but because the silence between them now held something deeper, something that didn't fit into simple words. But as soon as they set foot in the hotel lobby, reality greeted them with sharp eyes and sharper claws. Sitting in one of the lounge chairs with impeccable posture and a cutting expression was Vivian Whitmore, Graham's mother. Her cream-colored blazer, perfectly tailored, contrasted with the icy look she gave Elena the moment she walked in. The world of Southern elites was small, and the matriarch of the empire was never the last to know anything. "So it's true," she said, slowly standing. "The maid! You took the maid on a business trip?" Graham tried to step in, but Elena was faster. Her hazel eyes sparkled with indignation, but her voice remained steady. "I'm a nursing technician. I work here because I need to. And yes, I went to the convention, but not in the way you're insinuating." Vivian laughed with disdain. "Darling, there's no need to pretend to have integrity now. You already got what you wanted. Visibility, direct access to my son, and apparently other things too. "That's enough, Mom," said Graham firmly. "You're crossing the line." "No, my son. You crossed the line. Do you know what this girl represents? Scandal, exposure, weakness, and that the company cannot afford." At that moment, Elena felt the ground shake, but not from fear. It was something deeper. The pain of being judged by someone who didn't even know her, the pain of being reduced to her job title, as if love, truth, and dignity had zip codes or last names. A few hours later, hell began. A local gossip page published a venomous article. "Millionaire gets involved with hotel employee. How did no one see this coming?" Photos from the rooftop dinner, the dance under the lights, the exchanged looks. Everything was exposed. But the worst was yet to come. A secretly recorded video showed Elena entering the cabin alongside Graham. The caption, "The fairy tale hoax ends behind closed doors." Within hours, comments on social media exploded. "Opportunist. Long dress scheme. She planned it from the start." The pressure was so intense that the Whitmore Group's PR team demanded an official statement from Graham. That night, while Elena was alone in her room, phone turned off and face buried in her hands, Graham stood in front of the cameras. He had the chance to tell the truth, to defend her, but he hesitated. "Mr. Whitmore," asked a reporter, "was your involvement with a hotel employee a personal decision or a marketing strategy?" Graham took a deep breath. The answer was on the tip of his tongue. All he had to say was, "She's not a strategy. She's the woman I love." But fear, the fear of the board, the press, his own mother, won. "We have no statements regarding personal matters at this time," he said. "Our focus is on preserving the integrity of the company." They were just words, cold, calculated, but to Elena, they were knives. Hours later, he returned to the hotel and knocked on her door. He found her packing. "Wait, Elena, listen." "I've heard enough," she said without looking up. "You asked me to trust you, but you disappeared when it hurt the most. I didn't want to expose you more. You exposed me when you chose to protect your last name instead of the truth." Graham tried to get closer. She stepped back. "Remember our deal, that I could leave whenever I wanted?" He nodded, eyes filled with tears. "Then that's it." And she left, without looking back. The door closed, but what he felt wasn't a slam. It was a void, a silence louder than any scandal. That night, for the first time in a long while, the most powerful man in the room felt completely powerless. Time moved slowly after Elena closed that door. But contrary to what everyone expected, she didn't cry in public, didn't cause a scene, didn't seek revenge. She simply disappeared, left Charleston without warning, changed her number, and moved back in with her grandmother in a small town in South Carolina. There, far from cameras and cruel whispers, she began quietly rebuilding what the scandal had tried to destroy. She went back to school, re-enrolled in nursing college. During the day, she helped care for her grandmother, who now showed deeper signs of fatigue. At night, she studied with determination. Every page read, every class attended was a way to remember who she was and what she deserved. Meanwhile, in Charleston, Graham moved like a ghost. He avoided meetings, ignored press requests, stayed silent on social media. The Whitmore empire kept functioning, but without him. Until 3 weeks after the breakup, he made a decision. He gathered the company directors and announced his resignation, sold shares, broke contracts, gave up titles, privileges, everything that until then had seemed to define who he was. "You're making a mistake," his mother said, visibly frustrated. "Maybe, but for the first time, it's a mistake I chose." With the money from selling part of the group's assets, Graham did something no one expected. He founded an organization focused on basic healthcare, psychological support, and aid for women in vulnerable situations. He named the project with a simple symbolic name, Donna Lourdes, in honor of Elena's grandmother, but he never appeared publicly as the donor, never used it to clean his image. He wanted it to be real, to be useful, to reach her, if it ever did. 2 months later, on a rainy October morning, Elena received a letter. No sender, written in clean, simple handwriting. Inside was a printed invitation on recycled paper, accompanied by a small pressed flower. "We invite you to the opening of the new Donna Lourdes Community Health Center, dedicated to the women who hold up the world in silence. We'll be waiting for you. Healing doesn't begin in the body. It begins when someone cares." She read and reread that note, heart racing. There was no signature, but she recognized that silent message, recognized the gesture. Days later, she showed up at the event. She wore simple beige pants and a white blouse, hair down, eyes alert. The center was small but beautiful. It had a garden with wooden benches, a warm consultation room, and murals with quotes about dignity and hope. It was, without a doubt, made with intention, with soul. When she arrived, everything was already underway. People were speaking, others exploring the space. And then she saw him. Graham stood apart from the crowd, wearing jeans and a blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He was alone, next. Through a tree, eyes brimming with tears, looking at her like someone seeing something they thought was lost forever. Elena stopped. He didn't come to her. He just waited. She took one step, then another, until they were face to face, the same distance as their first meeting. But now, everything was different. "You came," he murmured, voice unsteady. "You called me without saying my name," she replied. "I didn't know if you'd hear me." She looked around. The center, the murals, the grateful looks of the women receiving guidance and care. "I heard," she said, "because it wasn't just for me, it was for all of us." He nodded, unable to say more. And there, in that silence filled with meaning, the first crack in the wall between them began to fall away. But forgiveness still hadn't been spoken. Elena took a deep breath, the soft scent of lavender and damp wood floating in the air of the newly opened garden. There were voices in the background, quiet laughter, phone flashes capturing the first morning of the community center. But between her and Graham, time was suspended. He remained there, still, as if unsure whether to speak or just feel. His grey-blue eyes were tearful but steady. There was no pleading on his face, just truth. A calm resignation. He wasn't trying to impress her. He just wanted to be worthy of her. Elena took 2 more steps. They stood face to face, close enough that she could hear his uneven breathing. "You didn't say a word," she murmured. Graham looked at her. There was something different in his expression, something she hadn't seen before, not even during their most intimate moments at the cabin. He looked vulnerable. "Because I learned that sometimes what matters most isn't what we say, but what we do," he said softly. "I spent my whole life trying to control everything, the image, the story, the people, and I lost you in the process." Elena blinked slowly, trying to hold back tears. "I'm not the same man anymore," Graham continued, sincerity in his eyes. "And I don't want the same life. I don't want to go back to parties where no one listens, or dinners where everyone lies. I want you, if you'll still look at me like you did that night." She felt the words hit her chest like a tide breaking, silent but devastating. That night, the dance, the balcony, the kiss, all of it still lived inside her, tucked away in a corner where pain and love shared the same space. A tear rolled down. Elena didn't say anything at first. She just let the silence carry the answer for a few seconds. Then she slowly walked toward him, stopped so close their fingers nearly touched, and said, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be by my side." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if those words were shelter after a storm that had gone on far too long. Then she stepped even closer, placed her hands on his face, as if touching something sacred. He held her waist gently, as if afraid she was just another dream. When their lips met, there was no rush. It was a slow kiss, full of weight and healing. A reunion of souls. The scars between them didn't disappear, but they stopped hurting, because now love was free, without contracts, without appearances, just feeling. The world around them, with its applause, voices, and expectations, disappeared. It was as if only the two of them existed, in that eternal moment where forgiveness turned into a promise. The sea breeze gently blew across the porch of the light wooden house, where wildflowers grew between the steps, and a pair of old chairs sat in the sunniest corner. It was there that Elena often studied on quiet mornings, with a mug of tea and bare feet touching the floor. The house was just a few meters from the sand, in a simple village on the South Carolina coast, far from city chaos, scandals, and a noisy past. She and Graham had decided to start over from scratch. No cameras, no labels, no contracts. Graham now dedicated himself to managing social projects focused on women at risk and public clinics across the state. He traded expensive suits for light shirts and started signing documents as a volunteer, no longer as CEO. He didn't talk much about what he had lost. He just said he had finally gained something money could never buy: purpose. Elena completed her nursing degree with honor and emotion. On graduation day, Graham was there, sitting in the front row, eyes brimming with tears and that same quiet admiration as always. When she walked on stage to receive her diploma, the audience stood, but it was his look that truly made her smile. A few months later, a local TV station ran a special feature on the new Donna Lourdes Health Center, which had already served hundreds of women and families. Eleanor was invited for an interview. Reluctant at first, she ended up accepting, not out of vanity, but because she knew the story wasn't just hers. The reporter, seated in front of the center's blooming garden, asked the final question. "Eleanor, if you could sum up in one sentence what truly changed your life, what would you say?" She took a deep breath. Her hazel eyes, even more serene with time, met the camera without fear. "It wasn't money that changed my life," she said firmly. "It was love, the kind that grows where there is truth, and the courage to stay, even when everything seems to fall apart." The camera captured the shine in her eyes and the respectful silence that followed her words. Graham, watching from afar, leaning against a pillar, smiled with his eyes. He knew there was no publicity that could capture what that moment truly meant. That night, the two of them walked home along the beach. She held his hand, the tide brushing their ankles, the starry sky serving as witness. "Do you think the world will ever forget everything that happened?" she asked softly. "Maybe not," he replied, gently squeezing her hand. "But we don't live to please the world. We live to honor what we feel." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then may we never lack courage. Or love," he added. There, with no audience, no pretense, just two survivors of their own pain, their love lived on, calm, steady, and true. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your score from 0 to 10 in the comments and let me know which part moved you the most. If this story touched your heart in any way, like the video, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next stories. Before you go, I've picked another moving story that will touch you even deeper. I'm sure it'll stay with you for a long time. Click here and watch now.